Up our next speaker, who is Robert Alft. He's our Green Party candidate for New York State Senate District 46. Bob's a retired school bus driver from Voorheesville and an activist with Veterans for Peace and Bethlehem Neighbors for Peace. Please welcome Bob Alft.
Hello, I'm Bob Alft. How many people are here in Townsend Park for the very first time? Okay, there are a lot of people who have been in this Townsend Park many times for Black Lives Matter, for Occupy Albany, for being against the war in Iraq. I've been an activist for 40 years. Every time that I go to an event, and sometimes there's a few people like this, and sometimes there's 10,000 people, and sometimes 100,000 people. There's one thing we always have to do, and that's go back home. And we have to spread the word. We have to be active in our communities, not just suit up and show up, but do things. Howie Hawkins is that kind of person. He not only is an activist, he's been building a political party. You can have all the great ideas in the world. You can be an activist all you want, but when you show up in the voting booth and all you have is a fascist on one end and I don't know what Biden is on the other, but whatever, if those are your only choices, what were you doing in the street all this time? Whose mind have you changed? What have you been able to fucking do? Nothing. November is the beginning, not the end. We're activists. We're going to do this. We're going to make sure this country is finally going to take the place it deserves in the world. We used to think of ourselves as number one. My dad is a World War II veteran. He did some things he's not proud of. He went to his grave regretting what happened in Tokyo. But you know what? When he came back home, he didn't have to worry about his health care. He didn't have to worry about anything. He just got his... You're paying, what, less than 2% tax on that transaction? But Governor Cuomo and the Democrats say, here, at the end of the year, $16 billion, you can have it all back. We've been giving it back for the last 30 years. Every year, Wall Street goes up and down. They make it and they break it. The federal government bails it out, and then we give them all of the money that we collected on that transaction tax back. It's ironic that right now, Cuomo's talking about us having a 16% deficit in the budget. Guess how much we gave Wall Street this year? $16 billion. We could be in the black right now. Wall Street gets everything and we're paying. So if I'm running in the 46th district, Senate district in New York. I know none of you probably are in that district. It's a carve out for the Republicans. But the history of this district and the Green Party is a very good example of why we need ranked choice voting. Right now, there's 4 candidates. The Democrat, whose name is Michelle Henchy. The Republican, whose name is Armadour, to replace the former Republican, whose name was Armador. I think we've got some name things going on in this district. Then there's a guy by the name of Gary Greenberg, who's running as an independent write-in candidate because the Democratic Party kicked him off the ballot. He couldn't even get into the primary. And then there's me. I want to give the voters in this district, the 82,000 that don't show up every year, a chance to vote for somebody that's going to stand for them and not for the boys down on Wall Street. I'm sick and tired of it. And I hope you are too. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. That was great. And if you haven't checked it out, it is pretty amazing that the Republican candidate who's not running in Bob's district, his name was George Amador. The current Republican candidate is Amador with a U. It's the same exact political sign with a U instead of an O. They're trying to make sure he wins, and Michelle Hinchy is Maurice Hinchy's daughter. So, of course, the Democrats kicked Gary Greenberg, who's an actual activist who fought for the Child Victims Act and other wonderful things, off the ballot, and gave Michelle Hinchy, who has barely any experience, the nomination. Next, I'd like to bring up Steve Greenfield, who's our Green Party candidate for the House of Representatives in New York's 19th District. Steve's been a volunteer firefighter for 16 years, served as secretary and delegate to the Ulster County Firemen's Association for most of that time, a 2-term elected school board member, and has held numerous appointed positions with the town of New Paltz and the school district, where he currently serves as a community member of the Legislative Action Committee, which he chaired while on the board. Steve's married with 3 teenage children, and the family belongs to the Jewish congregation of New Paltz, where Steve serves as a de facto fire safety officer. Welcome, Steve Greenfield.
Thank you, Caleb. Hi, I want to thank everybody for coming out here today. I want to thank the socialists for stepping up and joining in a unity ticket. I want to say that I am here to endorse candidates for office. I am here to endorse Howie Hawkins for President of the United States. Come on, give it up for Howie. All right, that's the event we're having here today. My district is the 19th congressional district. If you go right across the bridge to Rensselaer, you're in my district. If you go just to the south to Columbia County and Greene County, you're in my district. If you go up to Rensselaer County, you're in my district. So hopefully some of you people are in the district, or at the very least know people who are in the district. And I want to start out by saying, since we are all blacked out by the media, every single one of you has to go home and commit to using your own outreach systems, your social media, everything you've got, to send links, to reach out to people. Believe it or not, you even have to put the fundraising links on there too, because none of us are able to get media coverage because as if we're newsworthy, and none of us have the money to buy the news coverage the way other people can, because they are offering policies that refinance the donations that the major institutional donors give them. And that's exactly how the system works. You know, I go back about close to 20 years. I go back 19 years with Howie. He's one of the first people I met when I joined the Green Party when I moved up to the Hudson Valley. And one of the things that I really enjoy about the Green Party, and one of the things I've enjoyed about discussing things with Howie, is that we discuss what a just world would look like. We discuss what a healthy world would look like. We discuss, you know, what a just America would look like. We discuss things about how if you're not talking about workplace democracy, then you're not talking about democracy at all. You know, everybody I know in the Green Party starts out designing what it is they want to do by first engaging in a rigorous examination of what justice would look like, what democracy would look like, what a clean environment would look like, what a transition to renewable energy would look like, what that would look like. Democrats and Republicans, they don't have those conversations, ever. They get people together and say, how can I trick this constituency into voting for me? How can I trick that constituency into voting for me? How much money can I raise? Can you put together a foundation? I gotta tell you, if I have to watch that video of Michelle Obama telling everybody what a great guy Harvey Weinstein is one more freaking time, my head is gonna explode. So it's a good thing it's not happening right now in front of me, because then you'd all have to witness that. You know, somebody was just mentioning, Bob was mentioning the wildfires. Hold on a second, I'm gonna let these firefighters come through here. How about a hand for Albany Fire? Everybody on that truck is a public worker. There is not a single private sector worker on that truck. Not a single private sector dollar went to buy that truck. That truck was spec'd by public employees. It was those employees that are riding on it that are gonna solve that incident. Were trained by public trainers. They use public equipment. They draw a public paycheck. They're in a union, and they get a pension, and they get health care. So let's give it up for the Albany Fire Department and what they're doing right now. You don't see any private sector employees going out and doing what they're doing. Some of them might not be coming back. You don't get that from Democrats and Republicans, because when fire departments were started, they were private. You paid for them voluntarily, just like your health insurance today. You got it through your homeowner's insurance. And then the insurance companies made deals with different vendors of fire service, that whatever made them the highest profit. And then by the 1880s, everybody all over the world, including in the United States, stopped that system, and they stopped it because it didn't work. And it didn't work for some very obvious reasons. For one thing, if you have two houses and they're contracting two different fire companies and they both get the alarm, who's using the fire hydrant? Another reason it wasn't working. The people next door to you, they don't think that there's much risk of a fire and they can't afford it, and so they didn't buy fire insurance. Their house is on fire. You own fire insurance. Guess what? Nobody's coming to put out their fire, and so your house is going down too. That's how the system used to work, and everybody said, what kind of nonsense is this? Cities are burning to the ground. And so everybody switched over to municipal fire departments. We have the same issue right now. It's all about the framing. I ask people all the time, why is it that when I get off a fire truck, I don't ask anybody to see their fire insurance card? We get off the truck, we resolve the incident, we leave, we go back home, and we don't send anybody a bill. But when 911 goes off and sends the rescue squad for a medical emergency, they show up with a clipboard. They're good people. I work with them every day. They wish that it didn't have to be that way. They show up with a clipboard. They're going to take you to the hospital, don't get me wrong, even if you don't have insurance. They're going to work on you. But when you get out of the hospital, you're going to find yourself with an $1,800 bill. And then, you're going to have to choose whether you want to send your kid to college or whether you want to get out of debt to the rescue squad and the hospital. And that's as ridiculous as the old firefighting system ever was. In fact, it's even more ridiculous because the stakes are much higher. If you don't go to the doctor and you're infectious, you're going to walk around and you're going to carry that to other people. So, when people talk about socialism as being the enemy of capitalism, I know that a lot of us like to think of that from a theoretical standpoint, right? It's a completely different way of approaching the distribution of resources, right? And so we theorize on that in a very big way. But the enemy of capitalism is not really socialism. The enemy of capitalism, if you know anything about capitalism, the enemy of capitalism is monopoly. And that's what we've got here. And I'm going to tie that back to what I said when I started about how Greens and socialists and other people from the left always initiate their control. I look at what the proposals that I see Democrats and Republicans making in these scenarios, and I see them saying that we're going to expand Obamacare because this is some kind of bridge to complete universal health care. Well, let me tell you about that bridge, okay? In 2008, Harvard did a study and found that there were 45,000 Americans dying every year due to lack of health insurance. Yale and Lancet did a study last year that showed that now that Obamacare has been in action for 10 years, we're now losing 68,000 people a year due to lack of health insurance. This was not a bridge to universal health care. That was a great slogan that got over on everybody. It was a bridge to increase death. Fewer people have been able to afford primary care every year Obamacare has existed. They tell us that they're going to get their way to a Green New Deal by temporarily shifting over to fracking because fracking is a bridge that's better than other forms of fossil fuel we're currently using. Except the largest growing component of greenhouse gas emissions right now is leaking methane from fracking sites. Again, it's a bridge to death, and they're building power plants that run on fracked gas like Dance Camera down in Newburgh, like Cricket Valley over in my district in Dutchess County. My Democrat opponent, Antonio Delgado, he supports the operation of these plants even though they have 40-year lifespans. When is this bridge going to happen? After there's no glaciers left. I have 3 teenage kids. They're 19, 18, and 16. I ask them if they talk about this kind of thing among their friends. They say to me, "What are you talking about? It's the only thing we talk about." Okay? We older people that have been witnessing this happening, I know most of us here have been resisting this our entire lives. But our generation owes the younger generation to keep our organizing skills in place. You know, they have the drive and the desire to do this, but we have to remain integrated with them and provide to them our skills and our experience and draw from them their energy, because they don't have any life to look forward to. I'm going to close with just this one last thing, because I really want to hear from Howie. You know, so much of my consciousness has been formed over the years by conversations with Howie and reading the publications he made and watching videos of conferences where he speaks. And so that's why I was such a hearty supporter of him becoming the candidate this year to carry the Green Party banner and the eco-socialist banner forward, as he's been trying to do since 2010, and getting us a ballot line here in New York. Let me just mention that too before I close, which is that this ballot line issue is a really big deal. People keep telling me, and by the way, I'm one of the people who did it. I've served in local office. I've run for the lower positions and I've won them. I was on Jason West's campaign committee twice. I've elected the first Greens that were ever elected to office in this state by working my ass off to make sure that would happen, and then making sure that I could be the best public servant that I could when I got elected to my positions, which were overseeing public sector positions. We can't run for those lower positions. You see the paradox there. We can't run for lower positions if we don't have a ballot line. And the Democrats and the Republicans are in complete control of whether or not we have a ballot line. We don't want running for president to be the only way we can run for the lower offices that we can actually win. That's just what we've been handed. And as long as that's what we've been handed, we in New York in particular have to look at, for the time that it's going to continue to exist, that the Electoral College is giving us a gift. Here in New York, Democrats win statewide offices by 1.5 million to 3.2 million votes. If you believe in what's being said up here today, and you have friends who believe in what's being said up here today, then you need to tell them that any vote that they vote for a Democrat or a Republican are the only actual wasted votes in this state, and that if you vote for Green and keep that line in place, then people are going to be able to run for town board, people are going to be able to run for school board, people are going to be able to run for water commissioner and the different positions that we need to save the environment, to provide health care, and to gather the experience we need so that by the time we're running for Congress like I am, shockingly enough, between the Democrat incumbent and the Republican who's never run for office before either, I'm still the most qualified candidate for Congress in my district that's on a ballot this year. That's a devastating reality to have to face, because the news won't cover me because I don't have the kind of money that the other candidates have, and that's how they decide if I get on the ballot. And so I want to close with this one thing about why I vote Green, and I'm going to tell you, no matter how controversial this may come off, if I were living in a purple state, I would still be voting Green. Yeah. Without hesitation. And I would be telling other people, do whatever it is you think that you have to do, but I'm going to explain to you why I'm voting Green even in a purple state. And that's where I'm going to close, even after having described to you that we have the leeway here in this state to vote without that particular concern. The reason is that when you tell somebody, you've got my vote, and then as soon as you're elected, I'm going to pressure you to do things that I did. I'm stopping in the middle of that sentence. Their ears shut down after the first half of your sentence. If you're going to mention votes at all, it has to be the second part of your sentence. It has to be by saying, and you're going to have to commit to those things if you want to have my vote. Okay? The strategy that progressive Democrats have been using since I first watched the Get Clean for Gene campaign get overthrown by riot police in Chicago in 1968 in favor of a war candidate who hadn't even been in the primaries. Howie and Bob, there's a couple of us here old enough to have witnessed that, remember that when that happened, and we've been watching it happen again and again for the 52 years since we watched that happen. As soon as you say you have my vote, the conversation is over, because they know that even if you pressure them and they welcome you into their office, and then you can say, hey, I had access, and then 4 years from now, you're going to vote for them again. You have already told them that there is nothing they can do that is going to cost them your vote. And as soon as you've said that, your hope of having any of your issues legislated into American policy or New York State policy is over. It's over right then and there. And so I want to tell everybody right now that you have to tell everybody and remind people, use your networks. We don't have access to the press. We need people power. Use whatever it is you've got. Use your own voice to get this message out there and say that everyone's doing it backwards. If you weren't doing it backwards, things would have changed by now. And you know what? They have changed. They've changed by moving ever further to the right. Bill Clinton did things to organize labor, the environment, and financial regulation in this country that Ronald Reagan couldn't have dreamed of doing. Andrew Cuomo did things in this state with the 2% tax cap and education cuts and the Wall Street tax rebate that Republicans couldn't have dreamed of doing. And it's still happening because every time one of them runs for office, progressive-minded people say, I'm very worried about the outcome of this election, so you've got my vote, but I'm going to need to be able to talk to you as soon as you win. Okay? And that's backwards. The only way to make this happen is to tell those people, you absolutely do not have my vote. You're going to have to get down on your knees and beg for my vote. Don't talk to me about any of your goddamn bridge policies, because we know where they go. We're done falling for it anymore. We've had it. We've had it. People are dying. People are dying in California. I had to hump up a hill, 400-foot rock scramble. I'm 59 years old. 3 days in a row, I had to hump up with tools and hose a 400-foot high rock scramble in Mohonk, down where I live. And I don't even get health insurance. What kind of nonsense is that? What kind of crap goes on in this state and this country because we keep telling people, you have my vote no matter what. We're going to flip that script. We're going to tell these people, you're going to beg for my vote, not with one policy, with 10 policies, with 20 policies. When I ran for this office 2 years ago, I had people coming up to me begging me to drop out of the race because I'm going to draw votes away from the Democrat and possibly help the Republican win. And I issued this challenge to every one of them, and I issue it again today. Go on my website. If you find a single policy on my website that you can find on my Democratic opponent's website, I will drop out of this race. Guess how many emails I got back? My Democratic opponent then, as now, had many elements of his platform that were identical to those of the Republican. My Democratic incumbent's voting record in Congress differentiates from Nancy Pelosi's only when he crosses party lines to vote with Trump. He just got an award from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce for being the most likely to cross party lines Democrat. They love that shit because it kills us and our families and our futures. So from now on, everybody get out there and understand the dynamic. The only way to get what you want is to vote for it. Elections, politics are about power, and there are two sides to the power coin. One side of the power coin is to aggregate it to yourself and work for it and build it and achieve it. But we're not working in a vacuum. There are other people that are working to do that as well, and obviously they have hundreds of billions of dollars with which to do it and control over the institutions of public relations and publicity. And 19 is transmitted, and how much worse than the flu it is. Except Bob Woodward knew that 6 months ago, and he didn't tell us until only 3 weeks ago because he was maximizing book sales. Bob Woodward, Donald Trump, they're doing the exact same thing, and they're doing it for the exact same motive. Self-interest. Capitalist. Yeah, I'll say it. Capitalist self-interest. Because that's what capitalism incentivizes. Do whatever works best for you, no matter how many other people it harms. And so Bob Woodward is the man of the hour right now for doing the exact same thing and for the exact same reasons that Donald Trump did it. And that'll never happen if Howie Hawkins is president, and it'll also stop happening the day that Howie Hawkins, even if he doesn't become president, it'll stop happening the day that, like Eugene Debs and Norman Thomas in an earlier era, start getting enough votes that the people who do those things have to worry that they're going to lose power if they keep doing it. And so I encourage you to vote green in a blue state, vote green in a red state, vote green in a purple state. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to give you my good friend and someone I would really love to be President of the United States, Howie Hawkins.
So here we are. We're fighting for the very survival of the Green Party and an independent left in this country, so that candidates like Bob Alft and Steve Greenfield can just be on the ballot. We got a governor, when the New York Times found out about it, they called it the Democrats' secret plan to kill third parties. And that's what they want to do. What other self-respecting democracy has the two governing parties administering elections so they can keep their competition out? We have political hacks from both parties on the boards of election. And whenever there's disputes like we're having in Wisconsin, in Pennsylvania, in Montana, it's these hacks that decide our fate. And in Wisconsin, it's strictly party line vote. And they blaming us. We just trying to exercise our First Amendment rights to bring our programs forward. And so we know about the Republicans' voter suppression efforts, right? Purging the voter rolls, not putting enough polling places in black communities, having stupid photo ID requirements like in Wisconsin, where a student ID doesn't count, so those University of Madison or Wisconsin students in Madison can't vote. And black folks can't vote because a lot of them don't have driver's licenses because they use public transportation in the hood in Milwaukee. And that's what's going on in Wisconsin. Instead of fighting that, the Democrats are fighting our right to exercise our First Amendment right to run. And you're going to be reading about this. You might have seen on the cable news like they're blaming us. The Democrats set this up. My running mate, Angela Walker, working class black woman, came up in Milwaukee. Democrats in Wisconsin know who she is. She brought her local amalgamated transit workers, Local 998, into the Wisconsin uprising when the Republicans attacked collective bargaining rights. Her union was exempt, like the police and the firefighters, because it was a divide and conquer strategy by the Republicans. And then she was very critical when the Democrats said, "Get off the streets, workers. We'll take care of it. We'll have a recall election." That failed. And because she was so prominent there, people in Milwaukee said, "You got to run for sheriff against this crazy David Walker, a Trump-loving conservative Democrat." Democrats know who she is. She got 20% of the vote running as an independent socialist. They don't want her on the ballot in Wisconsin because people know who she is. So we're in a situation there where the Democrat, they're saying we're holding up the absentee ballots. No, it's not us. The Democrats got a bogus complaint. She moved during the petitioning period. We notified the Wisconsin election commissions, and she certified her current address with an affidavit, a declaration of candidacy when we filed our petitions. We needed 2,000. The staff of the Wisconsin Election Commission said we have well over 3,000. We had enough people signing our petition, but they said she gave them the wrong address on the early petitions. But that's what the Wisconsin Election Commission said to do. And then they had a hearing with a heavy gavelled Democrat not letting us present our evidence. So we had to take them to court. And now you got the Democrats blaming us and saying the Republicans are trying to stop the election. So we're saying, make a ruling already, Republicans. The Republicans are the majority on the Wisconsin Supreme Court. Or the Democrats can withdraw their complaint. We don't want to stop the vote. But it's not us doing it. And so we got to understand that they're going to make us the villain when they're the villains. When they talk about the Greens spoiling elections, no, it's black voter suppression. 100,000 in Florida in 2000. George's brother Jeb got the campaign chair, who was the Secretary of State, to disenroll 100,000 black voters who likely would have voted for Gore. And they want to blame Ralph Nader. And then in 2016, there was 75,000 ballots in Detroit that were never counted because the Republican Secretary of State put in broken scanners. So they couldn't run them through, so they put them in a box. And they were never counted. Greens took them to court, not the Democrats. And the Republican Secretary of State said, well, this is fishy. We got more votes than were scanned. We can't recount them. And of course, the Greens are saying, that's exactly why we need to count them. And the Democrats, Clinton had a couple lawyers there, and the judge, even though they weren't party to the case, turned to them and said, well, do you have anything to say? Oh, no, we're just observing. And then the Democrats turn around and blame us. And like Steve was saying, they are making this out to be, you gotta vote for Biden, no matter what. Well, we face life or death issues, and the Democrats have no solutions. In fact, this is the most vacuous, issueless presidential campaign in my lifetime, and that goes back to 1952. When you think of Joe Biden, what's he for? Nothing. Yeah, he's Uncle Joe. He's not as bad as mean old Donald Trump. You know, at least we know Donald Trump's for the wall. Of course, the Republicans didn't even adopt the platform. They just said whatever Trump wants, you know, and Trump we trust. Might as well put that on a dollar bill, as far as the Republicans are concerned. But Joe Biden, as Steve pointed out, is a legislative architect of mass incarceration. And that was Clinton's idea. When Clinton unveiled that when he was running in 1992, he did a photo op at Stone Mountain, Georgia, the spiritual home of the Ku Klux Klan, with a bunch of prisoners, almost all black, behind him. And he laid out this program. I mean, I can't even think of a photo op Donald Trump's done like that. That's your lesser evil. And then look at police brutality and systemic racism. The police we got are what the Democratic machines want, because they're funded by the real estate industry, which profits 6 different ways off of segregation. And we're more segregated now than we were by both race and class when the Fair Housing Act passed in 1968. And they had the police policing the boundaries of the new Jim Crow, which are the municipal lines and the school district lines. And their mission is to keep downscale people down, particularly black people, and out of the upscale communities. That's why over 80% of what they do is harass poor people of color for low-level offenses and non-criminal behavior, as well as harass us all with tickets, but they target the black community. Only 5% of what they do relates to violent crime, and about another 12 or 13% to serious property crimes like burglary and carjacking. And they only clear about 25% of those cases with arrest. That's what we think the police are supposed to do. They don't even do a good job at that. And the statistic that gets me the most, this is from the Vera Institute for Justice, a study they did a few years ago. 60% of the victims of those crimes don't even tell the police. Why? Because they don't trust them. If you're at the scene of a crime, either as a victim or a witness, you don't want the police coming because they say you at the scene of the crime. You might get arrested. That's the way people feel about it. And that's how corrupt the police are. So that's one life or death issue. Police are getting away with their murders, their assaults, and their rackets like civil asset forfeiture because they're able to police themselves. So we need community control of the police. We need police commissions, publicly elected, or I'd prefer just elected by lot like juries, random samples so the politics don't influence. And they would have the power to hire and fire the police chief, to set the policies, oversee the budgets, and independently investigate and discipline officers for misconduct. And clean out on some fascists. He ain't competent enough to be a fascist. Really, I mean, the guy's a dummy. He's a huckster. He's a racist. And he's hollowing out the federal government. You know, if he sent federal agents into Portland, a fascist would have just took over the police force and told the mayor, get the hell out of the way. Trump backed off when they gave pressure on him. He's got a fascist mind, but he's not going to execute it. But we got to worry because that fascism, which is the old racist bloc we've had in this country for our whole history, It's a minority because of gerrymandering and the electoral college. They got more power than they deserve. You know, we got to watch them. But that's one life or death issue. Also to deal with this question of systemic racism. End the war on drugs. Make marijuana legal, taxed, and regulated like we do tobacco and alcohol, which are more dangerous. And then the hard drugs, decriminalize them like Portugal did. So instead of a criminal charge, if you possess one of these illicit drugs, you get an appearance ticket and you go before a doctor, a social worker, and a lawyer. And they look at your situation and see how they could help. Do you need drug treatment? Do you need counseling because you're using drugs to cope with another problem? Do you need a job to stabilize your life? And since they started this in 2001 in Portugal, overdose deaths have disappeared. HIV is not spreading. There's not any drug-related street crime. And actually less people use those hard drugs, which is really important now because we got an opioid epidemic. It's killing too many people. People who might have got hooked because they've got painkillers, opioid painkillers from the doctor, they get addicted, then they got to go on the street, get heroin. A lot of it laced with this fentanyl. They don't want to let anybody know because it might be a criminal charge, and they end up dying. And this is not, and of course, the drug companies have been pushing the opioids. They should be prosecuted. So drug decriminalization, community control of the police, and then defunding the police. Okay, fine. You know, if 80% of what they're doing is things they shouldn't be doing, should be done by other agencies, okay, put that money there. But there's not enough money there. You could take the whole police department, you're not going to house the homeless, treat the addicted, or deal with all these other social problems. We need a federal program to rebuild these racially oppressed communities that have been segregated, discriminated, and exploited for generations. Needs to be multi-trillion dollars over multi-years. And you're not hearing anything like that from the Democrats or Republicans. So, systemic racism. And then another life or death issue, of course, is the COVID crisis. Donald Trump, he's a loser. COVID won, he lost. He's a loser. He knows what he should have done. He could have been the hero. He could have listened to public health advice and, you know, done like the whole Pacific Rim did, like they did in Europe. Instead, he got some stupid ideas about keeping the economy going while people get sick and die. And of course, that's not what happened. So he's a dummy. But what about Joe Biden? He has had the national platform since he became the presumptive nominee. He didn't do a news conference asking questions and answers until a few weeks ago. He was invisible. He lives within commuter distance of the White House press corps. He used to commute to the Senate. He could have convened them in a socially distanced news conferences like Andrew Cuomo did, get on cable and pound away at the solution. Test, contact tracing, isolating those exposed and infected, suppress community spread of the virus, and we go back to work and to school safely. Instead, he just stands back and lets Trump allow tens of thousands of people to die. You know, if you can help solve a problem and you don't, you're complicit. So don't say it's just Donald Trump. Where's the damn Democratic Party? They don't have a clear demand. Test, trace, and isolate. And while Biden was there, he could have pounded away on saving the Postal Service, the $600 supplement for unemployment insurance, and many other issues. There's not a clear message from him except he's Uncle Joe and he's a nicer guy than Donald Trump. And I'm afraid, you know, he's not going to mobilize his base. They're going to stay home and say, I don't know what he's for, you know. So that's another life or death issue. And then, you know, these have come up. When I started this campaign, it was about 3 life or death issues. The climate emergency. You see the forest burning in California, where they're burning in the Amazon, Australia, in the Arctic, north of the Arctic Circle. The International Panel on Climate Change came out with their report 2 years ago about how we could stay below a 1.5 degrees Celsius rise in global temperatures, which is a threshold beyond which it really gets dangerous and disastrous. And they identified a global carbon budget of 420 gigatons carbon. We're emitting 42 tons a year. That's 10%. So we got 8 years left before we blow through that boundary, that budget. And of course, Donald Trump calls climate change a hoax, but Biden acts as if it's a hoax. His climate policy is terrible. You know, he doesn't say it in so many words, but he wants to frack the hell out of the country. So we have natural gas fired power plants, and then he says, but we're going to do carbon capture and sequestration. No, they're not. It's not economical. The only way they'll do that is that they're subsidized by the federal government, by you and me. And then he's pro-nuclear. For the first time in 50 years, the Democratic Party's saying we need more nuclear power plants. Well, we already saw that under the Biden-Obama administration. They provided loan guarantees to 6 nukes in South Carolina and Georgia. And already 4 of those nukes have been abandoned for cost overruns and construction delays. And there are 2 in Vogel, Georgia, that they're still pouring money into, but that's only because Brian Kemp, as Secretary of State, suppressed the black vote, stole the election, and got elected instead of Stacey Abrams. And he's the Republican from Georgia Power and the Southern company that owns Georgia Power. So they're squeezing Georgia ratepayers to build nukes. And nukes cost 2 or 3 times more than most forms of solar and wind power. So why the hell would you do that? So the Green New Deal has been the signature issue of the Green Party for the last decade, the 2010s. We ran on it here in New York in 2010. Our presidential candidate, Jill Stein, ran on it in 2012 and 2016, a Green New Deal for America. And then after the 2018 midterms, the Sunrise Movement and AOC sat in Pelosi's office. Then the media paid attention. It went viral. Well, great. The problem is the Democrats took the slogan and diluted the content. They eliminated the ban on fracking and new fossil fuel infrastructure, which is the first thing we got to do. Because if we don't stop that, we're going to be locked into decades more fossil fuel burning, and the planet is cooked. And they dropped the phase out of nuclear power. And then they extended the deadline to get to zero emissions from 2030 to 2050, which the climate science, like I just related, says is too late. And then they brought it to Congress as the non-binding resolution for a Green New Deal. And Pelosi's never let them vote on it. She calls it the Green Dream, derisively. And McConnell in the Senate said, oh, we'll let you vote on it because half you Democratic senators are running for president. Let's get you on the record. And so Schumer said, oh, this is a trick. We're going to vote present. And all those Democratic senators voted present, except 4 voted with the Republicans no on a Green New Deal. So if you think you're going to get a Green New Deal from the Democratic Party, and you know the Sunrise Movement is just mobilizing for the Democrats. The problem with these progressive Democrats is they call defeats victories and mislead the people. And that's why the whole country's been moving to the right, because we haven't had an independent left. The progressives get taken for granted. We get lost in the sauce when we give our votes to somebody like Biden. He didn't know we were for a Green New Deal or Medicare for all. We voted for Biden. We gave away our voice if we're progressives. We gave away our power. And we'll get taken for granted in a Biden administration. And that's what's at stake to keep the independent left alive when we get through the November 3rd election. So that's the climate emergency, which more and more people recognize. You know, the thing about the Green program is the majority of people agree with us. After that sitting in Pelosi's office, a few weeks later, they polled America. Over 80% are for a Green New Deal, including 64% of the Republicans. But we're not getting one from the Democrats, let alone the Republicans. Second life or death issue is growing inequality. Working class life expectancies are in decline in this country. Think about that. This is a developed country, but we've had 45 years of stagnant wages, while housing costs and healthcare costs and going to college have gone through the roof. And so people are disappointed in what life turned out for them, and they're turning to alcohol, drugs, suicide with handguns, and a lot of people not being able to get health care. Here's an example. The man that lived downstairs from me in Syracuse, 60-year-old, low-wage worker on Medicaid. He needed some kidney medicine to maintain his kidneys. Medicaid gave him the diagnosis, but they didn't give him the drugs. He had to go pay for the body, We need universal rent control right now, like we did during World War II, when they were putting money into arms instead of housing, and rents were going up. As a stopgap measure to stop all these evictions and displacement due to rent rises. And then we need public housing done the right way. Not just isolated projects in the worst part of town for people of color that further segregates them, but mixed income like they do in Europe. You got professionals, middle income working people, and low income people in the same developments. So it's a desegregation program. Give me an energy program. They'll be powered by clean energy and green materials. It'll be a jobs program, obviously, and by linking it to building a real transit system, we can create walkable communities and fight sprawl and inefficient use of resources, as well as an affordable housing program. So our eco-socialist Green New Deal budget calls for 25 million units over 10 years. Now there's a Green New Deal housing program we got from AOC and Bernie Sanders. They only call for 2.5 million units over 10 years. And I don't know where they got a number, but there's 10 million people that are low income, don't have access to affordable housing now. We need to build 25 million units if it's going to be desegregated housing, and 40% of those units are reserved for low income people. So those 10 million low income people have access to affordable housing. I mean, if you're going to propose a good program, which the AOC Sanders program is, scale it up to solve the problem. Don't play tokenism with us. So jobs, income, housing, healthcare, Medicare for all. We want to go further than socializing the payment. We want to socialize the delivery as well. Hospitals and clinics, we want to bring them into the public sector. Put the doctors and the nurses, the other healthcare workers, make them public employees and make them accountable to us through locally elected health boards. 2/3 by the public, 1/3 by the workers. They bring in expertise. So they answer to us so we can make sure every neighborhood's got the healthcare resources it needs and that we're rationally using. We don't want hospitals competing for customers with the latest MRI when some neighborhoods don't even have a clinic and a doctor that people can go to. That's what community control of a national health service can do. And we had a bill like that. Ron Dellums introduced back in the 70s. We had 3 options: Nixon, Kennedy, and Dellums. Nixon is Obamacare. Have the federal government mandate private insurance and subsidize it. Kennedy was single payer payment for services that are privately delivered. And the Dellums system was a democratic, socialized system. That's what we really need. And actually it's more cost effective than just socializing payment. So jobs, income, housing, health care. What am I leaving out? Oh, education. Child care and pre-K, right up through post-secondary, trade schools, colleges, continuing adult education should be public and free to the students. You know, the CUNY system was free from 1848 till 1976. We're a richer country now. There's no excuse. Most countries do provide public housing for everybody. And then finally, a secure retirement. You know, the boomers, because wages were stagnant and costs rose, they raised their families, and a lot of them are retiring only having Social Security to fall back on, so they continue working. They don't really retire. And some of them have student loans that get garnished off their Social Security check. That's criminal. We say double Social Security benefits so every senior's living above the poverty line. So that's an economic bill of rights to end poverty and economic despair. And then the last life or death issue that none of the major party leadership or presidential candidates have talked about is the new nuclear arms race, which the Democrats initiated with their nuclear modernization program with Republican support, and now Trump has continued. So the strategic nukes are becoming 6 times faster than they were. You no longer launch on warning. There's not time. You launch on anticipation. And they're putting more tactical nukes in the conventional forces. And these tactical nukes are pretty damn big. They're bigger than Nagasaki and Hiroshima. And they are deployed with the crazy military doctrine of escalate to de-escalate. So if you're losing in a conventional war, use some tactical nukes to throw back the other side, and then you de-escalate, which will never happen as Daniel Ellsberg has shown us in his book, The Doomsday Machine, his second Pentagon Papers. He was a nuclear war planner before he was a Vietnam War planner. And he describes how once a few nukes fly, they all gonna fly, and we all gonna be dead. This is a life or death issue, should be a top campaign issue, and it hadn't even been discussed. So we're calling for peace initiatives. Cut the military budget 75%. Withdraw from these endless wars. Start withdrawing from these over 800 foreign military bases. Pledge no first use of nuclear weapons. Disarm to a minimum credible deterrent, and then go to the other nuclear powers and say, look, we're no longer a threat. We want complete and mutual nuclear disarmament. Because if there's ever a nuclear war, nobody's going to win. It's just going to kill us all. And go there with world public opinion. 3 years ago, and hardly anybody knows this, 122 nations agreed to a new treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons. The International Campaign for the Abolition of Nuclear Weapons got the Nobel Peace Prize for that. And I bet a lot of you don't even know that. Because the political leadership of these two corporate parties doesn't talk about it, and the corporate state media doesn't talk about anything they don't talk about. This is a life or death issue hanging over us. The Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists says their doomsday clock the closest it's ever been to midnight. You'd think that'd be an issue worth talking about. And it's not. So here we are, an issueless campaign between the major party candidates. And we're trying to get our voice out there and stay on the ballot so people have an option. So what are we going to do? I think all of us got to start talking to these so-called progressives that say, I got to vote for Biden because I hate Trump. Trump is dangerous. Yeah, he is. But there are no solutions coming from the Democrats. Or they say, I'm not going to take a position. Man, everything gets to me. I came up in the San Francisco Bay Area when the Black Panther Party came up when I was a teenager. They had a slogan, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. You can't stay neutral. So I think we need to challenge our friends and say, oh, you know, I'm speaking for this group, we're not going to say where we stand. Take a stand. You know, this is life or death issues. We're not playing around. We really got to get serious because the climate, people dying because they're poor, and the nuclear arms race, the pandemic, and the racism that goes on, and we keep seeing more and more people killed by the police. And all they talk about is changing use of force policies. You know, they had a policy against chokeholds in New York City since 1993. They helped Eric Garner. So we need community control. We need structural change. We need power for the people. Not, you know, begging the Democrats from a position of powerlessness because we gave them their vote and got lost in the sauce. That's a dead-end strategy. We got to stop calling defeat victory. And we got to challenge these people in these progressive movements that are not looking at the cold, hard reality. We're getting our butts kicked on the climate, on war, on austerity. I mean, right here in New York, we got Democrats got the Assembly, the Senate, and the governorship. And as Bob was talking about, the stock transfer tax, that pretty much solves the fiscal problem. It's pennies on a trade for the traders, the rich folks. But Cuomo, Trump used to fund the Democratic machine in New York. That's what real estate people do. That's a power structure. He gave money to, you know, Kamala Harris and many other Democrats, Clintons and so forth. You know, when the election's over and they get behind closed doors, it's business time. They take care of business. And when it comes to the economy and foreign policy and environmental neglect, they're on the same page. They do fight over cultural issues. That's how they mobilize their respective bases. Those are important issues. But that's not all that's at stake. We got life or death issues at stake. So we got to go to these progressives. They try to shame us for voting for what we want. No, shame on them for voting for what they don't want. Shame on them for giving away their power. Shame on them for silencing their voice. And we got to do, you know, the old-fashioned stuff because, as Steve pointed out, the media is not covering us too much. We got to make phone calls, knock on doors, take names of people that are ready to come out, and then make sure they vote on November 3rd. as I think I mentioned, the only people that got enough votes to get us a ballot line this year, now that the law has been changed, and just to review that, we got to get 3 times as many votes as we used to get a ballot line. We got to get it twice as often, every 2 years instead of every 4 years. And if we lose that ballot line, we got to get 45,000 signatures in 6 weeks instead of 15,000, which makes New York probably the hardest state now in the country to get an independent candidate on a ballot. And this country, we got to understand, this is such an anti-democratic, we can't wait 4 years to challenge the presidency. They always tell us that. Real solutions can't wait. So let's go out there, get those votes, and shove this new law down Andrew Cuomo's throat. Thank you.